Well, welcome to our first video of Principles of Macro. We're going to start with the intro section and we'll start talking about supply and demand too. Well, welcome to Principles of Macro. Today we're going to start our first video on introduction of macroeconomics in general and supply and demand. Okay, so the first thing is let's look at the definition of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is the study of individual choice under scarcity and how the implications that these have in terms of the effect of prices and quantities in individual markets. So you can think of, in macro, we study a firm, a household, maybe an industry. On the other hand, macroeconomics is the study of the performance of national economies and of the policies that governments use to try to improve that performance. So I always like to think about macroeconomics as the field that studies the forest. If you think about an entire economy as a forest, and each firm or each household is just a tree within the forest. One important component of macroeconomics is that we do care about policy implications and how the government can affect the outcomes, can affect the overall performance of the economy. Now, I also like to think about macroeconomics as the study of the science of the size of economics, of the branch of economics that studies the health of an economy. So as you're going to see in this class, we're going to learn about different indicators that tells us how the economy is performing. So we'll learn about how the economy is doing in terms of prices, in terms of economic growth, in terms of unemployment, etc. Just to give you an idea on how we can actually differentiate micro, and macro, macroeconomics studies, again, individual households or firms. So, for example, in macroeconomics, we may study an individual market such as the market for sugar, the market for carpets, say household cleanings. Other topics in macroeconomics are, say, cost of production, a demand for a product, exchange rates. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, studies the performance of national economies, say before, the aggregate economy, the forests, and we learn about indicators that tells us about how the economy is performing. So we'll learn about inflation. So we'll have a section on inflation. We'll learn how to estimate it. We'll learn about unemployment, a very important component. So how is the labor market in the economy is doing? And we'll learn about economic growth. So how do we measure it? How do we quantify it? And the factors that drive it. In terms of macroeconomics, again, we really care about policy. And there are probably three types of policies very common that we'll talk about. Monetary policy, we'll talk about deficits related to fiscal policy, and tax policy, also related to fiscal policy. Now, in order to start our discussion on macroeconomics, we have to step back and we have to describe the main model in economics, which is the model of demand and supply. So what I'm going to do for in the rest of this video, I will introduce some concepts related to demand and supply. Okay. The first concept that I want to introduce is the concept of a market. A market, again, consists of all buyers and sellers of a good or service. You can think about a market as just as a virtual market, just like eBay will be, or a lot of websites where consumers go and buy stuff that is available or posted by sellers. Or you can think about an actual market, like the stock market, where there are stocks being traded, or like the farmer's market where people go and buy vegetables and fresh fruits, etc. Okay, so A question that always comes to mind is, well, how is it that prices are determined? How is it that the price of pizza, gasoline, or a car wash, and goods and services in the economy in general, how is it that they are determined? And we're going to learn that is most of the time market prices are determined by demand and supply. Okay, so when it comes to the demand and supply model, we have two sides. And what I'm going to talk about next is the demand side. So let me first describe what a demand curve is. A demand curve is a schedule of a graph that tells us the quantity of a good that buyers are willing to buy at a given price. Okay, so it's a schedule of a graph that tells quantity demanded at a given price. An important property of the demand curve is that the demand curve is what we call downward sloping. So let me translate that. As the price of a good or service decreases or goes down, the quantity that consumers are willing to buy or wish to buy will actually increase. This actually allows us to conclude that the demand curve is downward sloping. So when we think about consumers are most of the time willing to buy more at a lower price. Consumers are willing to buy less at a higher price. So going back to summarizing what we have so far, buyers, that's the demand side. Quantity demanded is really important, is the amount, so the amount that buyers are willing to buy at a given price. And low demand is the price, and the quantity basically states that the price and the quantity demanded are negatively related, all else equal. That is, the demand curve is downward sloping. As we described before, the demand curve just tells you different quantity that demanders are willing to buy at a given price. We actually have a similar definition of demand schedule. Schedule is nothing else than a table with that information. It's a table that shows the quantity of demand at each given price. So let me give you an example of a schedule. So this is a schedule for the demand for milk. On the left column, we have the price per quart. On the right column, we have the quantity demanded. So at $1.50, 45 quarts of milk, and this is in billions of quarts, will be demanded. And you can see that as the price per quart falls, the quantity demanded increases. So at a price of 90 cents, 75 billion quarts of milk will be demanded per year. The demand curve is nothing else than a picture or a graph of the demand schedule, the data that we have in a table, and is negatively sloped. So the table that I had before with the data for the quantity demanded in billions of quarts of milk per year can actually be plotted as follows. And you will see that, as I showed you before, if the price is 150, the quantity demanded will be 45 billion quarts per milk per year. Let me just say that again, 150, the quantity demanded will be 45 billions of quarts of milk per year. And we can see that as the price falls, go down the vertical axis, the quantity supply increases. That's the downward slope property of the demand curve, right? So $1, the quantity demanded will be 70 quarts. 70 billions of quarts of milk per year. Now, let me close this video by discussing what is behind these property of the demand curve, or in other words, why is it that buyers are willing to buy a greater quantity at a lower price and vice versa? So there are two reasons for that. The first one is what we call the substitution effect, and the second one is the income effect. So let me just give you the idea of what these two are, and we'll stop on the demand discussion on demand curve for this video. Okay, so the substitution effect basically says a change in the quantity demanded of a good that occurs because a buyer or buyers in general will switch to cheaper substitute when the price of a good changes. So if the price of tea falls and people like tea and coffee about the same, they will be willing to buy more tea and less coffee. So in one scenario, the cheaper good is going to be demanded more. In the case of the example that I just gave you, the price of tea falls, so the substitution effect is will drink less coffee, will buy more tea, and therefore the demand for tea will go up given the substitution effect. The income effect basically says the change in quantity demanded of a good that happens because when the price of a good changes, the amount of a good that you can buy, which is your purchasing power, also changes. Going back to the same concept of tea and coffee, if the price of tea falls, you can also buy more tea because in relative terms, your money is worth more, or your purchasing power has actually gone up. Everything else held constant. Okay. The last thing that I will say regarding the demand side or consumer side is the cost-benefit principle, which is, again, you can think of the reservation price as the benefit that you get from buying a good. So that's how much you're willing to pay. When you think about the market price, consumers can see that as a cost. So the cost of a good is the market price. And it is the case that most of the time consumers will buy a good if and only if the reservation price, which is the benefits that a consumer gets, is greater than the market price or the cost that the consumer have to bear. And in that case, the consumers will buy the good. It is a case that at a higher prices, benefits will exceed the cost for a smaller quantity than at lower prices. This is nothing else again than the law of demand. Okay, we'll stop the video right around here, and we will continue this discussion with the supply side video. Thank you.